You're listening to The Vanishing Point on Soul Sound.
Chapter 2. The Cost of Looking. Dawn came slowly to the boundary corridor. The light itself seemed uncertain about entering this space. The sun hesitated at the corridor's mouth, its rays diffused into a pale glow. The stone walls barely illuminated. Verity walked with deliberate steps. Her boots were soft against stone. The stone seemed to hum with its own indecision. She had not slept, not truly. Her eyes burned with yesterday's strain, gritty and overbright. But she kept her gaze pinned to practical details, the door seam, the stair edge, the angle where wall met floor. She pinned the world into place. That was what she did. That was who she had become. The corridor narrowed as she approached the boundary. The air cooled too quickly, as if passing through invisible curtains of winter. The temperature drop was immediate and sharp, a physical shock that raised gooseflesh on her arms. Her breath became visible in small clouds. Silence thickened around her, that particular quality of silence marking the blind spot's proximity, a silence with physical presence, a silence that breathed. The stone walls seemed to drink in the sound. Even her footsteps were muffled here, as if the corridor itself was uncertain whether to acknowledge her presence. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than physics should allow, pooling like liquid darkness that might spill outward if she stopped watching. She set her breath into a steady rhythm, shoulders down, jaw unclenched, on purpose. The ritual became a shield. If she could control her breath, she could control her gaze. If she could control her gaze, she could control what was real. And there, at the edge where reality frayed into void, she found him. Silas stood closer to the threshold than yesterday, close enough that she could see the individual threads of his coat, the slight stubble darkening his jaw, the small scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Close enough that the intimacy of proximity made her chest tighten in a way she had no language for. He was watching her approach, his form held steady at the center of her vision, but at the periphery, when her attention wavered even for a heartbeat, she saw the micro-flickers, a stutter in his jawline, a blur at the edge of his shoulder, the instability made visible.
You came back.
A pause stretched between them, filled with the hum of the void.
I wasn't certain you would.
I said I would.
She didn't smile. Smiling felt too dangerous here, too much like admitting what this promise meant beyond the words themselves.
At dawn.
Silas studied her face. His eyes moved across her features with a focus that felt like touch, learning her, memorizing the architecture of her attention. Verity noticed the strain in her own eyes reflected in his, the red rims, the slight tremor and the muscles that held focus steady, both of them holding reality by force of will, both of them paying a price for this intimacy. She understood in that moment that this was not a rescue, it was a shared labor, two people choosing to hold each other in existence, breath by breath, gaze by gaze. When her focus wavered for a fraction of a second, drawn by a distant bird's call, his cheekbone flickered. She steadied her attention, locking onto the dark centers of his eyes, and he solidified again. The connection between them made visible in his stability.
I don't want your mercy.
He held her gaze, unflinching.
I want your attention, freely given.
The words settled into the space between them, like stones dropped into deep water. Verity felt the boundary hum, a frequency only audible when two people truly see each other, when they truly acknowledge the weight of their mutual gaze. She considered what freely given meant when the alternative was erasure, what choice meant when one option was dissolution. But she also heard what he was really asking, not for rescue, but for partnership, not for duty, but for desire. 3 seconds of silence. The cloud shadow passed. Silas flickered once as the light shifted, and Verity adjusted her stance, keeping him centered in her field of vision. She would not let him dissolve. She would not let the world take him while she had any say in the matter.
If I need to look away, I'll tell you first.
She held up 3 fingers, counting them down one by one.
I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. You'll know.
The rule seemed to settle into the air between them, a shared agreement that reality itself seemed to recognize. The boundary air tightened, acknowledging their contract. Silas's posture changed with the protocol in place. His shoulders dropped from their defensive height. His breathing slowed, certainty given shape, and shape given solidity.
3 seconds.
He nodded, testing the weight of the promise.
I can hold myself for 3 seconds.
They tested the agreement in silence. Verity deliberately blinked, slow, counted, and Silas remained stable through it. His breath caught, then steadied, his form held by his own effort, not only hers. The shared success became a private victory, a small triumph that belonged only to them. With the panic lowered, truth could surface. Silas settled against the boundary edge as if leaning on a wall, his posture casual now, but his eyes never leaving hers. The intimacy of sustained eye contact was beginning to feel natural, dangerous in its comfort, terrifying in how quickly it had become necessary.
Inside, there's no silence.
He paused, searching for the right shape for the concept.
There's a kind of noise. Everything that was ever forgotten, humming together.
Verity held the information like a gift. She did not interrogate. She did not demand explanation. She simply witnessed, and in her silence, she offered something the council never would, the dignity of being heard without being analyzed. The weight of what he'd shared settled between them, heavy and precious. She realized in the quiet that followed that he wasn't what the council would call an anomaly. He wasn't a phenomenon to be studied, a problem to be solved. He was a person the world had stopped noticing, a person who had learned to exist in the margins, in the forgotten spaces, in the blind spots of collective attention. And she realized something else, something that frightened her more than the void itself. She had spent 10 years learning to see without being seen, to watch without being watched, to hold the world in her gaze while remaining invisible within it. But Silas looked back. He saw her, not the anchor, not the observer, not the useful tool of the council, but Verity, the person behind the eyes, the woman who was tired and lonely and secretly terrified that her entire existence was nothing more than a prolonged act of looking at things that never looked back. The need terrified her because it was already there, already rooted, already growing in the space between their gazes, like something that had been waiting for permission to bloom.
You're not a phenomenon.
She saw him receive the words like oxygen, like water after drought.
You're a person the world stopped noticing.
For the first time since they'd met, Silas looked away. Just for a second, down at his own hands, as if checking that he was solid enough to be seen. His form held. The anchor was internal now, too. Her understanding had given him something the void couldn't take. When he looked back, something had shifted in his eyes, a new depth, a recognition that they were no longer just observer and observed. They were two people choosing to see each other in a world that had forgotten how. The council chamber existed in a state of unnatural stability. No geometry hesitated here, no walls breathed with uncertainty. The collective attention of the counselors held everything in rigid, absolute certainty. Verity returned with her report deliberately sparse, technically accurate, strategically empty. Every omission felt like a heartbeat held, a small defiance that tasted like freedom and fear in equal measure. She felt the weight of withholding as she crossed the threshold. Her eyes still ached from the dawn's vigil. The ink of her report scratched against her palms where she'd gripped it too hard. Marin waited at the center of the chamber like a spider in a very ordered web. Her posture was perfect, her attention was precise, and when she looked at Verity, there was something in her gaze that suggested she saw too much, or wanted to.
Your discipline is noted, observer.
Marin's voice was unhurried, courteous, but Verity heard the trap in every syllable.
The boundary remains stable, more stable than previous attempts.
The edge requires sustained focus.
Verity's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level.
I'm able to provide that.
Marin smiled. It didn't reach her eyes.
To ensure continued excellence, we're assigning written reports.
She ticked each item off as if listing favors.
Timed rotations. 2 additional watchers at the corridor posts.
Verity felt the walls closing in. Bureaucratic claustrophobia. The corridor to Silas had become a monitored route, not a private ritual. She saw the new watchers in her mind's eye, eyes forward, posture perfect, documenting her every movement. Marin leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout.
Remember, compassion for anomalies is often a symptom of over-involvement.
The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear.
If you begin to see patterns that don't exist.
Verity understood. Compassion equals diagnosis equals correction. If she cared about Silas, they would correct her. Then they would erase him.
Understood, counselor.
She held Marin's gaze without flinching, though her heart hammered against her ribs.
I report only what I observed.
Marin nodded as if satisfied, but her eyes stayed sharp, knives disguised as observation. 3 seconds of silence. Marin held it like a blade laid on the table. Verity refused to bleed. She left before the silence could turn into interrogation. Her steps measured down the corridor, her hands trembling where Marin couldn't see. The corridor felt longer than usual. The surveillance net was closing. Every route to Silas would be watched, timed, documented. Thane fell into step beside her without asking permission. His presence was solid, warm, unexpected.
You're walking like the walls are closing in.
His voice was slow, careful. He guided her down a longer route through quieter streets, offering privacy without demanding confession.
They aren't, you know, not yet.
Verity's voice softened.
She was too tired to maintain full armor.
What happens when the council decides someone is over-involved?
Thane gave her the truth as a weapon. He stopped walking, turned to face her fully, and spoke with the gravity of someone who had seen too much.
The void doesn't forget.
He paused, letting the silence hold meaning.
The city does.
The distinction between void and city as forgetting machines chilled her blood. The void was natural, honest, inevitable. The city was deliberate, political, engineered.
They make everyone stop noticing, one by one, until there's no one left to remember you existed.
Verity received this as both warning and resolve. Her attention was the only weapon against their engineered neglect.
Then I won't let them stop noticing.
She paused, choosing the final words with care.
I'll be persistent.
Thane studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pressed something small into her palm, a key warm from his body. His eyes said, "Don't ask now, don't ask here." A short pause. An escape route existed. The option was planted. Verity closed her fist around the metal warmth and walked on with a decision tightening in her chest. She would not give Marin any opening to erase Silas. She would be more stubborn than their surveillance, more persistent than their protocols. She would look until she dissolved before she let them take him. The boundary corridor at dusk held a different quality than dawn. The light was thicker, more golden, as if the day itself was reluctant to release its hold on the world. Verity arrived on schedule, her rotation window tight now, timed, measured, monitored. The knowledge of being watched made her skin itch, made her pulse behind her eyes throb with new intensity. She walked with her focus already strained, already stretched thin across the distance from council chamber to boundary edge. The corridor seemed longer today, the shadows seemed deeper, and everywhere she felt the weight of eyes, not just Silas's waiting gaze, but the watchers Marin had stationed, the surveillance that documented her every step. The boundary felt thinner than yesterday. Peripheral movement tugged at her attention harder than before. The air itself seemed eager to distract, to fragment her focus into 1,000 useless shards. But there, at the edge of the void, Silas waited, closer than yesterday, closer than he had ever been, almost at the threshold where real met unreal.
You're becoming predictable, observer.
Soft humor masked his concern. He could read her strain, she realized. He was learning her as thoroughly as she was learning him.
I like it.
The routine had become an anchor for both of them. Dawn and dusk, like tides, like breathing. Then the trap sprang. A lantern dropped at the far end of the corridor, glass shattering against stone in a crash that was too loud, too perfectly timed. The sound was engineered to demand witness. It pulled at Verity's ear with the force of social reflex, the instinct to turn toward disruption. Her gaze jerked toward the noise before her will could catch it. In the edge of her vision, she saw Silas's shoulder fuzz into static for one heartbeat, then two, then three. The distraction fractured his solidarity immediately, violently, as if the connection between them was a thread that could be severed by a moment's inattention. She forced her eyes back to him, locking onto the dark centers of his eyes with desperate intensity. But the assault continued. A voice called her title from the shadows, urgent, official sounding. "Observer Ashcroft." The social reflex nearly won. Her head started to turn before her will could catch it. Authority aimed at her trained instincts, demanding response. Silas wavered, his form stuttering like a failing light, his edges blurred into the void behind him, becoming one with the unbeing that hungered for him. Third distraction, a deliberate stumble at the edge of her vision, a body falling, the kind of motion that demanded witness, that screamed for help, that pulled at the very core of human attention with the gravity of potential tragedy. Verity's peripheral attention screamed to turn, her training as an anchor warred with her instincts as a person. Help the fallen, respond to authority, investigate the noise. Silas started to fade at the edges. The void pulled at him like a current, hungry and patient. Her focus was the only dam holding back his dissolution. Crisis point, his playful warmth stripped away completely, raw need made audible.
Don't blink.
Breath held, terrified.
Please.
His features blurred, then sharpened with each pulse of her attention. He was dissolving and reforming in rhythm with her focus, living and dying in the space between her blinks. Verity fought back with feral focus. She locked her stance, feet grounded, shoulders squared like a shield. Her body accepted the truth. This was a fight, not a task, a battle for his existence, and she was the only warrior. She could feel her attention as a physical thing now, a beam of force projecting from her eyes, from her will, from the desperate core of her being. It had texture, it had heat, it burned behind her eyes as she poured everything she had into holding him in place. The peripheral distractions still tugged at her. The fallen body she couldn't help, the voice she couldn't answer, the broken glass she couldn't investigate. Every instinct she'd ever trained screamed at her to turn, to respond, to be the good anchor she was supposed to be, the one who saw everything, fixed everything, held everything together. But she was learning a new definition of holding, a deeper, harder, more terrifying definition. Holding meant choosing. Holding meant sacrifice. Holding meant being the only witness while the world demanded your gaze elsewhere. The boundary air tightened around them, as if attention itself had weight, had mass, had the power to press back against the void.
Stay.
She gave him a rhythm to hold, an anchor of sound when vision wasn't enough.
Stay with me.
She began to count, drowning out the distractions with the force of her voice.
Count with me. 1.
The count became a tether. His breath matched hers.
2, 3.
The agents withdrew. The lures vanished as if they had never been there. The corridor fell silent. The test was over. Message delivered. The council was watching, testing, waiting for failure. They would not attack with force. They would attack with distraction, with engineered neglect, with the simple, terrible power of making people look away. Silas held, trembling but present. He didn't flicker now. Her fierce attention had welded him in place. After, the silence was too loud. Verity's hands wouldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline crashed through her like a wave. Her body betrayed what her will had refused to. Fear, exhaustion, the toll of holding reality together against an assault she hadn't seen coming. Without her focus on him, the boundary air turned colder. The void pressed closer, sensing weakness. Silas noticed her hands before she could hide them. He saw the tremor in her fingers, the way her breath came too fast, the way her composure was cracking at the edges.
May I?
He gestured to her trembling hand with his eyes.
Just anchor you for a moment.
Verity accepted with a nod, too shaken to speak, too exhausted to maintain the walls she'd built. He touched her wrist, fingertips light but certain. The contact was electric, grounding, mutual.
His skin was warm against hers, impossibly warm, and the warmth seemed to travel up her arm like a current, settling in her chest where her heart was still hammering from the crisis. Her trembling slowed. His solidity seemed to transfer through the touch, as if a tension could travel through skin as surely through vision. The place where his fingers met her pulse became a point of absolute certainty in a world that kept trying to dissolve. The discovery rewrites their risk, touch as observation, skin registering presence, maintaining the anchor when eyes fail. It was a revelation as profound as any she'd ever had in her years as an anchor, a new physics of connection, a new law of reality written by their bodies.
You can feel that I'm here.
He sounded amazed by the simplest truth.
Even if you look away for a second, your skin knows.
Verity tested it. She deliberately looked away for one heartbeat, toward the empty corridor, while his fingers remained on her wrist. He stayed solid. The touch held him even when the gaze broke. They had a fail-safe now, a deeper connection that didn't depend on the fragile thread of vision alone. Silas's voice dropped to a whisper, carrying words that were more confession than conversation.
I don't want your mercy.
He held her gaze, the contact between them electric with meaning.
I want your attention, freely given.
The air between them seemed to warm, his solidity firmed as if dignity itself stabilized him. The boundary hummed with their mutual recognition.
Then let me choose.
She turned her hand beneath his, palm up, offering connection.
And if my eyes fail, we use this.
The discovery settled into her bones like truth. Touch worked. They had rewritten their risk, expanded their arsenal, deepened their bond. She left with the new method memorized like contraband, knowing the next test would be worse. The council had shown their hand. They would not kill Silas with blades. They would erase him with distraction, with the simple, terrible act of making everyone look away. She kept her gaze narrow and deliberate as she walked the monitored corridors. Protection had become practice. Practice had become attachment. And attachment, she knew, was dangerous in a world that erased people for being noticed too deeply. Exhaustion finally caught her before she reached safety. It was a physical thing now, a weight behind her eyes, a blurring at the edges of her vision that had nothing to do with the void and everything to do with her own limits. She reached the boundary again, her steps heavy, her focus fraying at the edges. The smallest blink felt like a risk. The smallest lapse felt like betrayal. She couldn't hide it anymore. The strain that had been building across days of vigil, dawn to dusk, council to boundary, boundary to council, it had reached a threshold she couldn't force herself past. Her eyes burned, her focus blurred without her permission. Her body demanded sleep with a ferocity that frightened her. The boundary wavered when she wavered. Her fatigue threatened his stability. If she continued, she would fail him, not through lack of will, but through the simple physics of human limitation. Silas saw her limit before she could admit it. He had learned her patterns, her rhythms, her tells. He knew the moment her control began to crack.
Let me watch you.
The reversal of their dynamic offered without demand.
Just let me be the anchor for a while.
Verity resisted. Vulnerability felt like danger. She had been made to hold. She had been trained to watch. She had never learned how to be held, how to be watched.
I can't.
She shook her head, but the movement felt heavy, reluctant.
If I close my eyes, I don't know what happens to either of us.
Silas made it safe for her to yield. He removed the risk, framing it as experiment, not surrender.
1 minute.
He offered structure, just as she had.
Just 1 minute. I'll count. You'll hear me.
He reached for her hand, light and asking.
If I flicker, you'll feel it.
Verity yielded to need. She sank to the floor, her back against the corridor wall, keeping her fingers on his wrist like a second set of eyes.
1 minute.
She closed her eyes. The darkness behind her lids was different than she'd feared. It wasn't the void's emptiness. It was safe because he was watching. It was held space. Rest crashed over her like a wave. She'd been holding herself awake for days, and now, finally, she could let go. Silas began his count.
1.
His voice was the wall between her and dissolution.
2.
I'm here. I'm holding you. Each second proves I can do this.
3.
The rhythm matching her breathing, his attention keeping her real.
4.
The count continues, unhurried, certain, the ritual of their care made audible.
5.
At 5 minutes, she didn't open her eyes. She let herself drift deeper, trusting his count to keep her tethered. Trust became physical. Sleep began to claim her. She whispered permission for more.
Keep counting.
She was barely conscious now, clinging to his voice like a lifeline.
Don't stop.
She slept while he watched. In the quiet, Silas kept his vigil. He watched her breathe, her chest rising, falling, the small movements of her face in dreams. He watched the way her brow softened as sleep deepened, the way her lips parted slightly, the way her fingers twitched against his wrist, as if even in dreams she needed to know he was there. This was sacred. He had become her night watcher, though no one paid him for this service. No one had trained him for this duty. No one had ever trusted him with anything so precious. The weight of it settled into his chest, a responsibility that felt like privilege. He had spent years invisible, forgotten, unobserved. He knew what it meant to exist without witnesses. He knew the terror of dissolving while the world looked away. And now he held her reality in his gaze. He was the only thing keeping her solid, keeping her real, keeping her from slipping into the void that had nearly claimed him so many times. He watched her with a focus that felt like prayer, like devotion made visible, like love expressed in the only language their world allowed, the language of sustained, unwavering attention. His gaze kept her solid. His attention was the wall between her and the void. He spoke a vow under his breath, more to himself than to her, a promise to the sleeping woman who had chosen to keep looking.
I was forgotten by the world.
The vow settled into the stones, a binding witnessed by the void itself.
I won't forget you.
The promise that rewrites everything. Devotion spoken to the dark.
I'll be the one who remembers.
The gift he's giving in return for her gaze. Memory as love. Observation as devotion.
Always.
The final word sealing the promise. Let it hang in the silence like a star. He didn't blink. He didn't waver. He kept his focus on her as if his life depended on it. Because it did. Because hers did. The role reversal was complete. Protector and protected had traded places, and both were whole. He stayed perfectly solid, devotion making him real. 4 seconds of silence. Verity slept. Silas watched. The boundary held. The night passed. Safety existed here, in this moment, earned through trust and given freely. The chapter ends with Silas fully solid in his vigil while Verity slept. The romantic ritual was sealed. Their partnership was no longer one-sided. The void was held at bay by their mutual attention. And as the night deepened around them, one truth remained absolute. He stayed solid while she slept, like he'd made a vow the world couldn't break. Download Soul Sound on App Store to listen to the Vanishing